I brought some props with me today. That's always scary. Some years ago, before I was a pastor and before I was, a youth minister, I was on staff at a church, on their youth staff. There were about 7 of us on the youth staff, and I was living with a family. This was before we were married. Before marriage, I call it my BM years, before marriage. I was living with this family, and they had gone out of town, and I had a room in their house that was right off of the kitchen, so it was fantastic. But they were out of town one weekend, and I was staying at this house by myself. It was a very big house. And I'd been out with some friends and come back to the house, and it was dark, and I come in and get settled, eat some stuff, and get into my room, get ready for bed, go to sleep. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, it's about 1:30, 2, 3 o'clock, there's a loud noise, a crash, and I shoot up out of bed. And it's in that moment, this happened actually the other night, one of my kids woke me up, and I got to thinking, is this a dream or is this real? Have you ever had that experience? There's a loud noise, and you wake up and you try to think, is what's happening right now a real thing, or is this a dream? Well, that's what was going on, okay? It's a massive crash, this huge house, and I shoot up out of bed, and I'm trying to gather my resources to realize, okay, that was a real sound. I was not dreaming that. And then it hits me again. They're out of town. They're Claytons. The family I was living. They're out of town. There's loud noise, and I look at the clock. It's 3 in the morning, and so I start to get out of bed really quietly because I don't know what's going on here, what this loud crash was. And I go over to the desk that was in the room, and I get a pair of scissors. Okay, I'm going to take care of this mess right now. And my toolbox is over there, and I also grab me a hammer. So I'm going around the house. I've got I'm early 20s, right? And so I think I'm going to take this guy out. I don't know who's in this house, what they're doing. I'm going to protect the Claytons' house and all this stuff. I'm going to get them. And so I'm in my sleep clothes, and I crack the door open real quietly. All the lights are off. I don't see anything. Okay, I start to sneak out of the room. I'm walking around the house. I walk around the living room and the kitchen and the dining area and walk into the back bedroom, and I'm ready. I'm like sneaking in like I'm going to, it's a movie, right? And I'm going to take this guy down with my scissors and my hammer. And I can't find anybody in there, so I start to go upstairs. And I walk up the stairs, and I start checking the bedrooms upstairs and checking the TV room upstairs and the bathrooms, and I'm not finding anybody, and I'm trying to be as quiet as possible to see if I can hear this guy rummaging around the house. And so I go back downstairs, check the front living area and the office, and I can't find anybody, and I start to sneak back into the kitchen area. Like, he's making full circle. He's going to get out. I'll make sure the TV's still there, and I'm coming in. I'm sneaking in. It's been like 45 minutes. I'm searching the house. And I'm coming back in real slow, right? I'm coming in, and I sneak in, and this is the last room, and I just jump, and there's nobody there. So I flip the lights on. I just check everywhere one more time with the lights on this time, because that would have been smart to begin with. But so I walk through the rooms, and so I finally relax a little bit. I go into the kitchen, settle my nerves. It's been like an hour and a half searching the house. And I set my stuff down. Your adrenaline's been pumping that long. You just need a moment to decompress. And I just decompress there. Oh, man. And I look up, and I think, let me go get my glasses. And so I go back in the room, and I get my glasses. And I put my glasses on, and I walk back out. And looking at the back door, I see something's a little weird. Something's not right. I see all the blinds are down, but the blinds aren't down on the back door. That's weird. Well, I look down, and the blinds are laying on the floor. The blinds had come loose of the contraption, the bracket on the back door when I had shut the door and let the dog in earlier in the night, and they finally crashed at 3 in the morning and had smashed into the ground. So no glass was broken anywhere in the house. It was just the blinds had fallen off the back door and had led me, Mr. 6'5", running around the house in my sleep clothes with scissors and a hammer for an hour and a half, all because the blinds fell down. When you're alone in a situation, you don't really think as rationally as you might at other times. It's like if you watch a TV show and it's even got a slight scary storyline, if there's other people in the house, it's not that big a deal. You just go to sleep and whatever. But if you're there by yourself, it's a whole new thing. Even if you're a big, burly man, it's a whole new thing. And you've got the night light on, you got the living room light on, and you're going to bed very, trepidatiously. I'm going to be okay, all right, and you're keeping your eye out because it's different. There's nobody in the house. And when I'm there by myself and the blinds are falling, if the Claytons had been there, it would have been a totally different deal. I would have walked out, oh, okay, the blinds are down, no problem. But they weren't there, so I had assumed instantly, because I was by myself, somebody's breaking in and going to steal everything and kidnap me, and it's going to be terrible. It's going to be on the news. Church staffer killed and in fight to the death over a TV and all this stuff. And we found scissors and a hammer at his hands and whatever. But when we're alone, we think differently than when we're in a place of security or a place of comfort. We don't often think very rationally, especially in a scary situation, a situation that's not all that comfortable. And that's what we're going to see today in our passage of Scripture. Is a situation where some people were alone and they did not think quite that rationally. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 14. We started a series last week, and we're going to be journeying through this same passage of Scripture in different aspects. Matthew chapter 14, it's on page 820 if you're using the Bible on the rack in front of you. You can also find all the Scripture and the notes, as well as all the songs we're singing this morning, the announcements for today, the discussion questions that are on the back table. You can find them in the Bible app under the events button. If you click on that, our church will pop up and you can see all that in there. Matthew chapter 14, if you'll remember from last week, what's going on here is Jesus has just fed the 5,000, one of his most famous miracles. Little kid's lunch feeds 5,000. There's 5,000 men. So if you count the women, you count the children, we're talking 12, 15,000 people. Jesus feeds them all with this one little kid's lunch. And it's amazing. It's this fantastic miracle. Everybody's wanting to celebrate and experience what has just happened. Well, Jesus makes his disciples leave, and he dismisses the crowds by himself. Look at verse 22 of Matthew chapter 14. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. So Jesus takes the time and dismisses the crowds of, 12 to 15,000 people. I don't know if you've ever dismissed that many people, but they don't just leave the area as it was when they came. They leave it probably a little more messy with a little bit of litter and whatnot. And so I picture Jesus, as he's dismissing them, he's picking up the mess. He's cleaning up the mess. I don't know if y'all have ever looked at the sanctuary after y'all leave on Sundays. There's a smattering of trash around, and the bulletins are around. Or if you were in here after Christmas Eve, you can still see the wax on some of the pews from Christmas Eve. There's just stuff because people leave stuff. I mean, it's just the way it is. And we're, a few hundred people. Imagine it being 15,000 people, how much stuff they would have left behind. And so Jesus is there dismissing the crowds. I picture him cleaning up the stuff, and they're gone. The disciples he put in a boat because he had something for them to do, and he sends them across the sea. Verse 23. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. So Jesus goes up on a mountain to pray. Now, what we know from other passages, including this same story, is that's going on within Jesus is his relative, John the Baptist, has just died. And they were going to get some time by themselves. Jesus wanted some time to pray and focus on God and his purpose. His relative, John the Baptist, just died. So he goes, and that's when the crowd shows up, and he feeds the 5,000. In the midst of his grief, he feeds the 5,000. And then he dismisses them, and he still goes up by himself to pray on the mountain. But you notice, if Jesus is by himself, the disciples are also by themselves. Jesus is up there focusing on God, praying, and the disciples are by themselves out in the sea. And their experience is a little bit different than Jesus's. Jesus puts his attention on God. The disciples put it somewhere else. Verse 24. But the boat, by this time, was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. So the disciples are experiencing a storm. The disciples are experiencing rough water. Now, the disciples, many of them were fishermen. They should have been comfortable on the water, but they also knew this was taking them a lot longer to get across than it should have. It only should have taken a little while to get across. But here they are, and it's late into the night. They've been trying to get across the sea for hours. Again, another one of the Gospels telling this story tells us that they've been rowing for hours against the waves and against the wind, and they're not but 2/3, if that, of the way across. And they're really struggling to get across. The storm is really fighting them. Verse 25. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. So the fourth watch of the night, that is the darkest part. That is the part of the night right before the sunrise. Okay, the night's been going on. This is the last part of the night. Jesus comes to them walking on the sea. And the way Matthew phrases it there makes it sound very simple. And here comes Jesus walking on the water. No big deal today. And this is one of the, again, most famous miracles that we see in all of Scripture, Jesus walking on water. Even people who don't believe in God or don't believe in Jesus know about this miracle. Oh, Jesus, he's walked on water. And here we have Jesus walking on the water in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm, heading out across the water. It also points to how hard it was for the disciples rowing and only getting so far that Jesus is able to walk across without a problem and get to where they were before they can get to the other side. So Jesus is walking on the sea, verse 26. Now we get the disciples' response. Remember, Jesus was alone and he's praying. The disciples are alone, and this is how they respond to the movement of Jesus on the water. Verse 26. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. They were fearful. They were terrified. They responded with the sight of Jesus in the storm with, "It is a ghost." Now, we don't really know why they responded that way. Why would that be the very first thing that popped into their head? You know, they've been spending day and night with Jesus now for a little bit of time, and having spent so much time with Jesus, you would think their first response in the middle of a terrifying situation wouldn't be, "Oh, it's obviously a ghost," but that's right where they went. Maybe that was the way some of their background was, or where they had been raised, and that's just their first response to a terrifying situation or a terrible situation was, "It's got to be a ghost." So they scream it out, "It's got to be a ghost." But Jesus doesn't let them wallow in their fear. Verse 27. Immediately, Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." So Jesus doesn't let them sit in their fear very long. They respond with, "It is a ghost," and he speaks over the wind, over the waves, over the noise of the storm, and it resonates throughout the boat into the eardrums of these guys, and he says, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And immediately Peter, of course it's Peter, he responds to hearing Jesus. He gets infused with that immediate courage that comes from a level of security. And Peter answered him, verse 28, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Now, Peter's not a very rational thinking kind of guy. You know, if it's me and I'm in the boat and I'm terrified and it's a storm, I feel like I'm going to die, and then all of a sudden there's Jesus and he says, "Take heart, be courageous, I'm right here." I say, "Well, hurry up and get here, Jesus, get in the boat so we can, be secure and be taken care of." But Peter's first response is, "Hey, let me come to you on the water." He doesn't try to reason, how's this going to work? How is Jesus even walking on the water? How is he going to make me walk on the water? How is it, is the water going to be bouncy? Is it going to be like a bog? If I step on it, is it going to be secure? Am I going to sink a little bit? He doesn't go through any of that thinking. He just says, "If it's really you, command me to come to you." And Jesus says, "Come." Verse 29, he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. So here we have that fear, that terror coming back. When he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Now, look at this response. It's different than the one before. Before there was terror, there was fear, and they cried out, "It is a ghost." This time, there is terror, there is fear, and he cried out, "Lord, save me." The presence of Jesus changed his response. Verse 31, Jesus immediately responds again. Doesn't let him wallow in his fear again. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Now, have you ever jumped in water before? you've jumped in water and you go down pretty quick. I mean, you don't just hit the top and kind of hover there unless you do a belly flop. But, you kind of hit it and you kind of go down and you sink pretty fast. Well, here's Peter on top of the water. He notices the wind. He notices the waves. He takes his eyes off of Jesus and he sinks. This isn't some slow sinking quicksand type of deal. I mean, this is like, the lightning sand in Princess Bride. I mean, just go down fast. And he's sinking so fast. But Jesus jumps to him and grabs him before he can go down very far. And he pulls him up. And he kind of rebukes him a little bit. "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" As Peter's choking up water, Jesus saying, "Why did you doubt?" Verse 32. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." They experienced a miracle. They watched the miracle. Peter experienced a miracle on the water. Jesus got in the boat. All the disciples experienced the miracle when the wind ceased and the storm stopped. But notice back up in verse 24. I want to point out some things. It says, the boat by this time was a long way from the land. The boat was a long way from the land. They were a long way from security. They were a long way from a place of comfort. They were out there on the water. They were a long way from security. It says there they were beaten by the waves. They were beaten by the very thing supposed to be keeping them afloat. The very thing they were relying on to carry them across this journey. They were beaten by the waves. And it says there the wind was against them. The very thing that is supposed to be propelling them forward in their journey was fighting them. Do you ever feel like all of the elements in your life are fighting against you? That the thing that is supposed to be keeping you afloat is working against you. The thing that's supposed to be pushing you forward. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe it's your job. Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's your friends. Maybe it's maybe it's a mentor, somebody you were depending on, and they stumbled and messed up. And you're relying on all of these things, and the sense of security that you had in your life is like stripped out from under you, and you're out there flailing in the storm by yourself. If you've never experienced that, well, it's coming. That's part of life. You will feel that at some point, probably multiple times in this life. Security will fail us when we put our security in the wrong things. You see, we see Jesus alone on the mountain. The disciples are alone in the storm. But in the darkest part of the night, Jesus comes to the disciples. In the darkest part of the night, Jesus comes to them, and he doesn't let them sink in their fear. He immediately responds to their fearful reaction, to their terrifying reaction. And he says, "I am here. I am right here." Stop with the fear. Respond in faith. Now, what's interesting to me is when you compare Jesus and the disciples. Jesus was alone, and he was attentive to the Father. He was praying. He was faithful. Jesus was alone, and he was attentive to the Father. The disciples were alone, and they were attentive to the storm. They were attentive to the ghost that they thought. They were attentive to their own fear. Jesus was attentive to the faith. They were attentive to the fear. Jesus looked to the Father. They looked to the storm. You see, outlook reveals attention. Your outlook in this life reveals where you have your attention rooted. How your perception is, what your worldview is, reveals what you are focused on. Jesus was attentive to the Father, so his outlook was faithful. The disciples were attentive to their fear, so their outlook consumed them with terror. And they responded accordingly. Attention determines our outlook. Where we give attention determines how we look at this world, how we look at other people, how we look at the situations we face, how we approach our job. Is your job just a means to an end to put a certain number in your bank account, or is your job an opportunity to minister to the people there? Are you on this earth to make a bunch of money, or are you on this earth to serve Jesus? Jesus came to this earth to die for you. How are you living for him? Attention determines outlook, because where you look determines where you will go. Where you look determines where you will go. If you put your eyes on something, that will be innately within your body, you will begin to shift towards that thing. Undoubtedly, all of us have experienced this on the road, with being irritated at other drivers who aren't looking where they're going and are looking somewhere else and begin to veer into your lane. Or, let's talk about pet peeves here. Somebody who gets into the middle lane, let's say, on this road out here, and they're going to turn, and they've already got their eyes fixed on the thing they're turning to, and they accidentally veer into oncoming traffic because they're not really paying attention to where they are. Their eyes are where they're going and not where they need to be in the moment. Where you go is where your eyes are transfixed. We've all seen this in sports as well. We've seen it, I saw it multiple times this year during the football season. If a guy's going to catch a pass, and he's already thinking about the football move he needs to do next, and he's thinking about the guys running to him, he's got his eyes fixed on the ball, and if he starts to move his eyes to where he's going, he's going to drop the catch every single time. That's not just high school, that's not just college, that's guys making millions and millions of dollars in the NFL do the same mistake. They move their eyes to where they're going and miss the football. You got to catch it before you can move. Where you look determines where you will go. But notice also, it says that they were a long way from land. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land. Land represents a level of perceived security. They were a long way from the place that was secure, outside of the storm. But perceived security, or distance from perceived security, does not signify danger. If we are a long way from what we thought was security, that does not signify that we're in danger, because perceived security is really nothing more than familiarity and comfort. Because if it's perceived security, it's really nothing more than disillusion. It's a lie. We can put our faith in a level of security in a thing or a situation, but that thing or situation is not our true level of security. Because if we're robbed of that thing, maybe it's a level of money, maybe it's a situation in our marriage, in our family, in our job, and that thing is taken away, just because it's taken away doesn't mean we're still not in the midst of security. If we put our attention on Jesus and our security in Jesus, there is always security. It's different than what we may think in our human understanding, but it is still secure, because true danger comes from moving outside of God's direction. True danger comes from moving outside of God's direction. True danger isn't because you have stepped out from what you thought was secure. The disciples weren't in danger in the boat in the storm because they were in the water and not on land. The disciples were in danger because they were not focused on Jesus. It had nothing to do with the proximity of their bodies with the storm. It had everything to do with the proximity of their spirit in the moment. You see, even if the storm that we are surrounded by is a full-blown hurricane, there is no danger if you have followed God's direction. There is no danger if you followed God's direction. Because Peter didn't walk on water when it was daylight and the water was calm. He walked on water. He experienced the miracle in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm. We can experience the miracle. Jesus wants to involve us in the miracle, but we've got to follow God's direction. It makes me think of, I grew up in Houston, and we experienced some hurricanes over the years. They had one this past year, and I can remember it was after I had left and gone to school, but there was really only one hurricane I ever remember my family leaving town for. It was Hurricane Rita. They didn't even leave for this one this past fall, but they left for Hurricane Rita. It was a mass exodus from Houston. I remember because my grandparents lived in Dallas, and so it would take us to go from driveway to driveway about 4 hours, give or take. And my dad was of the mindset you didn't stop for anything, so it took 4 hours every time. And so we made it in 4 hours. Well, when they left and departed their house in Houston, it took 24 hours just about to get to my grandparents' house in Dallas. And when you leave Houston, you don't really notice them. but along the highway. And even at that time, they opened up both sides of I-45, southbound and northbound, all going north. And so it was just crazy. But if you leave Houston today, you can see them on the side of the road. Nobody notices them, but there are these signs that say hurricane evacuation with an arrow pointing that way. And you follow the directions, you can get where you're going. And if you pull out your phone and you pull up Google, you can see some back roads that will take you to where you need to go. And they ended up following some of the back roads, and it still took them 24 hours to get to where they were going. But you follow the directions, and only by following the directions do you get out of the danger. The hurricane still could have come, and it still could have caused a lot of rain and devastation, but because they followed the directions, they got out of there in time. Following God's direction removes us from danger. And it's only when we abandon God's direction do we find ourselves in the middle of danger. There the disciples were in the boat. If they would have simply put their attention on the faithfulness that they needed with Jesus, they would not have experienced the fear that they were going through in the moment. If they would have thought, Jesus put us on this boat to take us across the water because he's got a purpose for us to accomplish over there, then the storm would not have brought as much fear as it did. There still may have been a little bit of fear, but if they would have continued to have put their faith in Jesus, they would not have succumbed in the moment, screaming, "It's a ghost." If they really would have thought about it, they would have thought, Jesus has us here, Jesus has us going. We need to depend on the fact that Jesus knows what he's doing. And then Jesus would have walked across with them, gotten them across, and they would have continued on in their ministry. You see, it makes me think of a verse from the Old Testament when the Israelites were experiencing a similar situation. God spoke to the Israelites in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 8, and he said, "It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. So do not fear or be dismayed." Do not fear or be dismayed. And that word dismayed, its literal meaning is to be shattered, to be disheartened, to be overcome with fear, to be filled with terror. Have you ever been disheartened? Have you ever been shattered because of a situation? And God speaking to the Israelites, Jesus speaking to his disciples, take heart, it is I. It is the same principle. It is the same theme. It says, he will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. The Lord has gone before you. He has already walked that path and prepared the way for you to journey down that way. But will we respond in faith or in fear? Where will we put our attention? Will we put our attention on the storm or put our attention on Jesus? Because the storms are going to come. And the storm may be a level of temptation in your life. The storm may be a certain situation. The storm may be certain triggers that somebody else says that get you to respond in a certain way, maybe to bring things back into your life that you had already pushed out of your life, or that make you respond in a certain way that makes the situation worse in your marriage, in your job, whatever. The storm can be a lot of things, but you must understand that Jesus will not leave you or forsake you. He will not leave you in the middle of the storm. He is there with you. He has already walked the path and prepared it for your being where you are in the moment. You see, distance from Jesus signifies danger, not the storm. Distance from Jesus signifies danger. True security comes from attention to Jesus. True security comes from attention to Jesus. The darkest part of the night may seem like it's never ending. Or maybe winter will seem like it's never ending, right? Whether it's a physical winter that we're currently experiencing, or it's a emotional winter you're going through, or it's a winter in your marriage or other relationships may seem like they are never ending, but you've got to understand you are not alone. Jesus is coming. Jesus has already been there. Jesus is still there. He is constantly with us in the midst of the storm. The miracle in the story occurred in the darkest part of the night, in the middle of the storm. Jesus wanted to include the disciples in the miracle. Jesus wants to include you in the miracle that he is going to bring into your life. But are you giving Jesus the attention so that you can be positioned for the miracle? Because attention to Jesus positions for the miraculous. Attention to Jesus positions for the miraculous. Your attention will always position you for something. What you give your attention to will always position you for something. It will either position you for the mundane or it will position you for the miraculous. Attention to Jesus positions you for the miraculous. Now, I've told my story before, but if I had not given Jesus my attention, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you right now. I would not. I wouldn't even be anywhere near here. I never would have been a pastor. I never would have gone to school to get an education about the Bible. So I never would have gotten a job at that church in Dallas, which meant I never would have met my wife, which meant I never would have had the kids that I have, which meant my life today would be completely different than where it is. I would be, no telling, far out in the middle of nowhere, not following God, because I was going to go to school and play basketball. And God changed that road. I argued with him for a year because God wanted me to go to that school to have that education. And God has a funny sense of humor, because the year before he told me to go to that school to get this education, the basketball team, that school had a basketball team, the basketball team of that school had a nationally televised game, and a fight broke out during the game. And the president of the university disbanded the basketball team. A year after I graduated, they brought the basketball team back. Isn't God funny? That's no joke. That's for real. Like when I read in the alumni magazine the bringing the basketball team back, I laughed. I said, well, thank you. Because that was my plan, and God had a different one. And I argued with him, and I fought with him. And then when I finally said, okay, God, that was my senior year of high school, and I finally said, okay, God, I will do it. And so I missed I went to a junior college the first year of my college education because it was too late by the time I finally said yes to God to get in. And went in my sophomore year. And it was through that I began attending a church with my grandparents, and I heard about a job opening. I put in my resume. I didn't get the job I applied for. I got a different job. But it's through that different job that I got to meet Katie. And meeting Katie, we started dating, and through dating, we got married. Through getting married, we had kids. And then from that job, got another job. At that other job, was there for 7 years. And from that other job, and through God's orchestration, I came to DeQueen. And having now been here at DeQueen, we have now 4 children, and 3 of them are saved. Not only would we not have those kids, but they would not be saved if I had not followed the journey God led me on. Because my attention to Jesus changed my future. It changed my outlook. It changed my priorities. Now, if we don't give our attention to Jesus, our future could be completely different. We can be running around the house with scissors and a hammer, swinging at ghosts that aren't even there. Or we can put our faith in Jesus, our attention to Jesus, and experience a whole new life. The storm will come, the storm will rage, the storm will beat against us, but we can stand firm in the miracle because our attention is on Jesus. So whatever the storm may be, whatever the storm, whenever it comes, and it will come and it will rage and it will seek to pull the rug out from under you, and whatever you find your security, if your attention is on Jesus, you will still find firm footing. And so what has your attention? You have God's attention. That's why he sent Jesus to die as the Son of God, to die so all your sins would be forgiven, and then to raise from the dead so you can live after you die. And if you believe that, simply believe, I believe that you did that. Not have to live a certain way, not have to do a list of things to get into heaven, or say special words to get into heaven. All you have to do is believe that he did what he said he did, and you get heaven forever. And then he can begin to get your attention and change your outlook, and your life will change from that point forward if you have Jesus. You don't have to change on the front end, but he will change you on the back end. And if you want to believe today, man, what a great opportunity would that be if you believe today, for the very first time, that Jesus, Son of God, died for you and then rose from the dead. And you can gain heaven. You give him your attention for the first time. Not only will your outlook change, your life will change, your destination will change, you will change. All for the better, all for the glory. But there are times, even if we have Jesus, that our attention tends to veer towards not so fantastic things. And we can be off track. We can veer into oncoming traffic because we don't put our attention where it needs to be. So the challenge then is to give him our attention, to pursue him, that no matter what comes, no matter what berates us and seems to cripple us at times, we can find faith in the midst of the fear if our attention is on Jesus. So where is your attention today?